It's that time of year. We're approaching the fall and it is time to consider overseeding. In this video, we're going to talk about a few tips you might want to consider when you're doing your overseeding project. But first, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Would really appreciate it if you consider subscribing and smashing that like button. We teach everything you need to know about lawn care, and we try to deliver that information as quickly as possible, straight to the point. And as always, if you have any questions, I do my very best to answer every single question in the comments. So please don't hesitate. If you've got a question, leave it in the comments. I will try to get to them as soon as possible. All right, so where were we? I think, yes, overseeding. Starting with weeds, we just took care of some nutsedge here not too long ago. It is on its way out. We are pretty much ready to overseed, but if you have other weeds, it's probably a good time to start taking care of that. There are some label restrictions in which those weed control products will say things like you have to wait 30 days until you do your overseeding. So you want to start considering that stuff now before it's too late. Another thing to consider is timing. You have to time this out right with the weather, your area. Typically we do this here in the Northeast between like August, sometimes as late into even October. I've seen people do successful overseeds as late as even November around here. We are looking for those hot summer temperatures dropping down into the cooler fall temperatures. So just as the soils are going from like 80 degrees down into the 70s, right? That's the time to start overseeding. As the soil temps get even further down to like 65 and then even into the 50s, that's when it's starting to become a little bit too late. So timing is important, and it is different across the entire country. And that brings us to our next point here, is selecting your seed, because just as we were talking about timing a second ago, the type of seed you want to use is going to impact the germination time. Kentucky bluegrass, for example, that can take up to like 28 days, almost an entire month to even germinate. Whereas on the opposite side of that, something like perennial ryegrass will germinate in like 3-4 days. So consider the seed when considering your timing. And speaking of seed, I've been getting a lot of questions lately asking, what seed should I use for my area? One of the tools that I like to use is actually from seedsuperstore.com. It's actually on the very front page of their website. You can put in your zip code and it will tell you what seed is best for your area. I'll leave that link down below. Now let's talk about the process. Now, one of the very first things I like to do is I like to start lowering the height of cut on the lawn and consider dethatching. Lowering that height of cut is just going to make it a little bit easier for the tines from the dethatcher to work their way down to the soil layer, pick up all that thatch buildup, and help us get that air down to the soil layer, and encourage, more importantly, that seed to soil contact. You need that for this overseed to be successful. After you're done dethatching, it's a good time to do core aeration. That is actually very important to open up the soil a bit, get that oxygen down into the root zone of the soil, and it also pokes tons and tons of holes where the seed can fall in and help with growing and germinating and prevent, washout in the rainstorms, right? So core aeration and overseed, that's what it's typically referred to as. And that core aeration is important because you're pulling out plugs. Plugs are about the size of your thumb, right? You want to make sure you're pulling out a good length plug. And when you're considering that core aeration, you might want to water a couple days before to help soften up the soil so that you can pull that good plug. One more tip about core aeration is that if you are going to rent the machine, take the time and do multiple passes. If you're hiring someone, you may have to pay a little bit extra if you want them to do a little bit more work in doing some of those multiple passes. The more holes that you can put into the ground, the better. Now, up until this point, we have now completed all of the hard work. From here on, it gets a little bit easier. Next up is putting down your seed. Just put it down at whatever rate is recommended for the seed type. Overseeding rates do vary. Make sure you are following those instructions. They should come with the seed that you buy. There should be some seed rates on there. If not, I do like using something like seedsuperstore.com. Like I mentioned earlier, they will give you some general overseeding rates for the type of seed that you're using. And when you're on a property line, like I am right behind me here, you might want to consider using a drop spreader for your seed right on the property line, because you don't want to really throw anything out onto your neighbor's lawn. You want to drop it right there on the line, and you can use a broadcast or a rotary spreader for everything else. The drop spreader is also good around these planting beds to prevent the seed from getting into the dirt there. You want to just keep it on your lawn. Now this next tip, you can do it at the time of seeding. I do it every time when I do the overseeding, but some people do wait, and that is putting down your fertilizer. I like to use a fertilizer that contains the active ingredient mesotrione, or what's more commonly referred to as tenacity. For cool season grasses, it will do a good job of keeping some of the weed seeds from popping back up, but allowing our new grass seed to germinate. Now that product is offered by Scott's. I believe it's called their Scott's starter fertilizer, built for seeding or something like that. It is a starter fertilizer, so it has all of your nutrients in it, your nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and then it's also got the mesotrione in it as well. I've been using that product now for several years. I just pick it up at Home Depot, and it has worked for me every single year. Now, some people do like to wait a little bit longer to fertilize, and that's because during the germination process, it's not really taking up any of those nutrients. So if you're going to put the fertilizer down now with your overseeding, there's a chance that some of those nutrients are going to be kind of wasted. So if you want to make full use of your fertilizer, you might want to wait till you're past the germination period, till things are, you know, maybe not quite mature, but to a point where you feel like you can walk on the lawn again without damaging anything, and then do the fertilizer application then. Now, when I put fertilizer down at the time of seeding, I am also putting down some form of a biostimulant, a soil enhancement type product, like a humic acid, fulvic acid, or like a calcium based product. I've been using those for several years as well. There are many companies that make these products: Simple Lawn Solutions, Green County Fertilizer, AgriGrow, all great companies that make very similar products. Lawn Star is another one. You can get these online. You may even be able to pick them up at your local garden shop, but these products are good to enhance the soils, really making or allowing the plant to take up more nutrients from the soil. Now that the seed is down, and maybe perhaps you put down some fertilizer or some biostimulants, some people like to add a type of top dressing. I will sometimes put down peat moss, especially on bare areas. That's definitely something you can consider. It does add to the cost of your project, but some people like to do it to give like a nice covering over everything. Some people like to do it and use more like sand products to level the lawn, which you can certainly do. But if you are going to consider using a top dressing on an overseeding project, you just want to make sure you're not smothering the seed. You want to make sure you're maybe putting down like 1/8 of an inch of product down over top of your seeding. You don't want to smother things out. That could impact your germination percentage and overall yield of your overseeding. I feel like we've covered mostly everything here, with the exception of just one more thing, and it's probably the most critical part. You did all this work. This will not work if you don't do this, and that is water. You have to water your lawn, and you have to keep it watered and keep it moist throughout the germination process. If you don't do that, all of this hard work was for nothing. So make sure you set up either a DIY irrigation system or set your sprinklers to make sure that things are staying moist throughout the germination process. And that's another reason why I like peat moss, especially if you have a thin lawn or bare spots. Peat moss is a good color indicator of when it's moist versus when it's dry. So when it's wet, it's nice and dark, and when it's dry, it's a real light brown. So a real stark color contrast there that basically is a visual indicator to tell you that it needs to be watered. So I hope these tips were helpful for you. If they were, please give this video a thumbs up. I hope your renovations and overseeding go well this year, and we'll see you in the next video.